Absolutely. Thank you for great. Yeah, it is. Anybody has something else that want to add on the introduction? Good. Awesome. So I think let me say here what I understand from our conversation. It would be good. I just got this one. It was very interesting to hear some of the things that you put together. Let me just read what I got that can help us get started. Recent immigrants from sub-Saharan Africa make up a small but steadily growing fraction of the immigrant population in the United States, accounting for nearly 6% of the total U.S. immigration population.
You see what?
Yeah, you can go ahead and unmute yourself. African immigrants and their children account for 4.2 million U.S. residents, with 2.7 million identifying as first generation immigrants. This is near roughly 400,000 increase from the approximately 101,000 African immigrants in 1980, with 70% of the immigrants population arriving in 2000 or later. 77% of foreign-born population in the United States identify racially as Black. And this is a great conversation. Let's just go jump into a question, the first question, so we can be able to hear more about those statistics because it's really encourages to hear what's happening right now. My first question is, what inspired you to write Hidden Blackness? Was there a moment or experience that sparked the idea to write the book?
I can start a bit. So they're kind of like there are three, hopefully what I can say short points in my life that I think led on the journey to writing this book. So one was actually when I was a graduate student. So in terms of my background, you shared a bit about the research that I do, but I was born in the U.S. to parents from the Caribbean. The Mwangi comes from my spouse, who I'll mention in a bit, who's from Kenya. So I grew up in Florida, in an area where there were most of the Black people that I knew were immigrants or the children of immigrants from all over the Caribbean. But when I went to graduate school to study education, and we would learn about students and how they develop and things like that, oftentimes students were either discussed as Black students with multiple generations dating back to slavery in the US, enslavement in the US, or they were, when immigrant students were discussed, they were students who were, Latinx, Hispanic, or Asian, of Asian descent. But we never really spoke about students who both were racially Black and had an immigrant background. Those students just didn't tend to exist in the research we were reading about. And I really didn't understand why, because that was my experience, my background, the background of so many people that I knew. And it really kind of sparked my interest. Now, I certainly wasn't thinking I was going to be writing a book back then. I really was wanting to, move into becoming an educator in practice. But it just kind of always was in the back of my mind. Why are we invisible in how we're learning about education? The second point in my life that made me think about this is when I moved to the Washington, D.C. area a little bit later in life. And I met my husband. We'll have been married for 16 years next month. We'll be
Yeah.
celebrating our anniversary, who is, like I said, from Kenya. And I think, really kind of exposing me more to the diaspora more broadly. So, he had come to the US for college and became a teacher in Baltimore City schools. And was also, when I met him, had been in the US for about 10 years or so. And, we would just kind of share a lot about our experiences around issues of race and racism, around immigration and those kinds of pieces. And again, just always felt like these things were not part of the school systems in which we were engaging formally. We would see students, we would again know they exist, but just wasn't discussed. And so, kind of bringing in that the African part, like I experienced the Caribbean part, and then, but what really led to a desire to develop this book was actually when I had my first child, two boys. in 2017. And I just thought, oh my goodness, I have this child who has a West Indian heritage. He has a Kenyan heritage. He's born in America. He has, an African American heritage. Um, he is the diaspora embodied. And I felt like it really was really important for me to think about how could I use my skills as a faculty member and all the research I had been doing around this population, for the past few years to create something that someone could like literally physically have and be able to learn about so that people wouldn't have to say, wow, why aren't we being discussed? So I really, that was a big pivot point for really the impetus for writing this text for my children. And, if you get the book, you'll see that my dedication of the book was to them. So, so that's what I would say. It's just the lack of sometimes of being able to be in the spaces of education when education is such an important aspect of mobility in the U.S., such an important part of why people come to the U.S., and so important to success. We need to be part of the conversation. So.
Wow, no, that's very good to hear the story behind the book because and especially when it's personal because that was becomes your why you put it together and I can tell from the context of the book that when I haven't read the whole book but I mentioned to you I just got it a few days ago and I'm happy to go through it. But I think many of us as parents who have kids, they actually experience the same thing. And I was joking with my daughter when she was second grade. So she went to the school and they heard a story about Rosa Parks and when she came home, she was really mad because of the story the behind it. And so the conversation came a few days ago when we went to Nashville and we visited the the Martin Luther King that's the Rolane Park motel, and you went through the video and all that. So it became a conversation where we had two of almost 7 years ago. How bad, how mad she was, understanding that what the Black people went through and she was now asking the questions, is this the same thing that would have happened even if it was us happening today, right now? And connecting the experiences that time and now. It's very it's good that we're having this conversation because we can be able to open up those conversations, how people share their thoughts and experiences. Um, we can have this the next maybe do you want to add something, Anna? Ada? I'm going to use the short name because I don't want to butcher your name.
It's a-okay. I think Chrystal hit it on the head in terms of being able to discuss that a lot of not being seen in the literature and trying to make sense of why we weren't being seen in the education research, and how, for my experience, it was that in undergrad, I had taken a class and the professor was talking about all the Black kids just don't do well, but it's talking about the disaggregated Southeast Asian versus white, and looking at different immigrant populations in the white group, and how myself and many of my other Black peers that were in the class at the time were children of immigrants, and how we were also like, wait, this doesn't seem to be adding up in terms of the experiences of Black people that we know, let alone of Black immigrant people. And I had gone to the professor at the end of class and had asked, how come the data wasn't disaggregated to include Black immigrants? And she said, I don't know, that's just how the book had it. Maybe you should do the research around that. And I didn't know that you could do research around these things, especially being a first generation college student in the United States. And so that experience opened up the pathway for me to get into research, and to be able to start to explore educational experiences of Black youth. And then when I got to graduate school, wanting to look more specifically at African immigrant populations, I stumbled upon Chrystal's work, which really helped to be like, okay, there's not a lot of folks that are doing this work, but there's folks that are trying to explore these questions in these ways. and problematize what it is that we do know about Black immigrants, but also what is it that we know about African immigrants, Caribbean immigrants, but also about the Black experience more broadly in the United States.
Yeah, I think that's very, very, very important. I've been working with the immigrants for the last African immigrants for the last 16 plus years. And I think one of the biggest struggle we have is the data supporting the African immigrants. And what you just, it's hard, there's not much data out there. Even when you're writing proposals, it's hard, you have to highlight to back up your proposal with some substantial data, which we don't have. Um, and I
We
think
do, it's hard to find.
it's hard to find, and not many people have done research. I give you kudos because you specifically wanted to focus on that. Not many people have that because this static the data that I come across a lot is actually the African American, which they kind of put together the African immigrants and the African Americans. So any research, but whatever it is, and the findings, recommendations will be basically based on what they have found out from the African Americans. And the challenges is not the same. So even if there are some recommendations on what people can use on solution to some of the challenges, they may not be able to apply to the African immigrants. And that because some of the other things may not be incorporated into some of those challenges. It could be cultural barrier, language barrier. It's something that is when you talk about social determinants of health, it's some of those you may not be able to have those challenges when you deal with this particular African Americans than when you're dealing with the African immigrants. So I'm really happy that you're able to highlight that and emphasize the importance of people now doing the research on that particular population.
Yeah, and one of the things to note is that as Chrystal and I were doing the work around the book, there's a lot of Black immigrant scholars who do this work. It's just that their work doesn't necessarily get published.
Absolutely.
There are a lot of Black immigrants and Black American scholars who do work looking at the Black immigrant or the African immigrant experience. And so we do have like a catalog that has all the depository of all the dissertations that we were able to find that were on this topic at large.
Great, great. That's true. Let me ask the next question. So, because now we're talking about the challenges of Black immigrants. Your book highlights how Black immigrant students often experience both invisibility and hypervisibility. Can you elaborate on this paradox?
Yeah, definitely. So the ways in which they're rendered invisible is by how they're seen as being part of the Black American experience. Those that are multi-generational Black that have been here due to enslavement, as Chrystal had mentioned earlier. And so a lot of the education system sees them as just Black. A lot of society sees Black youth, Black immigrant youth as just Black. The way that they're rendered hyper visible is the ways in which sometimes we see them as kind of the successful canon, right? The successful individuals who make it into AP class or make it into all 8 Ivy League schools, even though that is not necessarily the only experience that Black immigrants have in terms of just academic success. It's that, so this way in which their experiences are both made invisible by being captured by a larger group experience, and ways that they're made to be hyper visible by making them an exception to the rule. And so we talk a lot about the model minority myth and the ways in which Black immigrants are made into a model minority, saying that they are successful in a particular type of way and that everybody else should be as successful as they are. And that limits our understanding of the structural conditions that shape who is able to succeed and how folks are able to succeed. It eliminates or doesn't account for what kinds of, we call it community cultural wealth. So what kinds of assets that they are bringing with them from their home country or their country of origin that could be of benefit to them as well. So ways in which they're rendered both visible and hyper invisible all at the same time is this really interesting paradox for Black immigrant youth.
That you want your Dr. Christie, have something else to add? That's very, really powerful, actually. I love that.
Yeah, no,
You have something.
I think Ada's captured it very well.
Great, great. And when I was reading that part of, because I think I can relate very well when it comes to, and maybe to highlight also the aspect of when it comes to the hyper visibility, is you are this kid, immigrant kid in the population in a classroom that is maybe predominantly white. Um, and many of some, because I've interacted with them, they'll tell you that when anything that is happening about um, African, then they expect that you have all the answers. There could be somebody who is actually been born here, they may not be, have a direct exposure. Or the other aspect is this guy is from Kenya, and any questions about Nigeria, about South Africa, they expect these kids to know. The teacher is also on them, the other kids in the school, they're putting too much expectations, and yet it's not that they may not be in their area. And I like the fact that you mentioned many of them. Us parents have also the same challenge when they tell the kid, every kid, every immigrant kid want to, their parents want them to be a doctor, an engineer, a lawyer, and I think there are four of them. So, so that is another aspect that when we go to the school, they have that expectation. There is all this high expectation and pressure from the community, which can be good and can be bad in a way, depending on how the kid interpret. But next, I mean, related to that question, I wanted to ask you, how do schools and colleges tend to overlook or flatten the diverse identities within the Black diaspora, and what are the implications?
Sure. I think there are a few things that can connect back to this question. So, one is that in US schools, in particular in K through 12 schools, we don't often do a really great job of educating about the diaspora, around educating about Africa outside of transatlantic enslavement, or talking about the Caribbean, or talking about, Black people in South America. We don't really talk about those things. And so how we tend to understand, even for example, Africa, where oftentimes, if Africa is mentioned in a history, it's mentioned in a history class, it's mentioned in relation to slavery, and it's speaking specifically about West Africa, right? Like those are the only things we tend to talk about. And likely in our current climate, it's going to get probably even less that we're going to be discussing these kinds of things. So I think we present um, the Black diaspora in very simple, in kind of static ways. And so, I think that impacts really everyone in the classroom, and it impacts American students, it impacts immigrant students. There's just not that learning and ability to dialogue. So then, of course, it becomes an issue when someone does have a question. They turn to a student, the Nigerian student, asking them about Ghana because they think it's all, everything is the same, right? So, there's that issue, that the schools, oftentimes are not always doing the best unless they have a very large population of a particular group. Sometimes they'll, take some more care, and that is actually a recommendation that we suggest. But otherwise, not really built into the curriculum. Another thing is that we talk about in the book is that in the U.S., race is considered what we call a master status. So, when we think about all of the different kinds of identities that a person has in the US, the way in which we understand it today was really constructed off of racial hierarchies, right? And so, if you are Black in the US, that tends to be perceived first. All of the other aspects of you can sometimes just kind of get subsumed under that Black identity. And so, oftentimes in schools, and I'll say this for myself, even though I lived in a home where, the food and the values, the news, like all of the things that the way in which we spoke, like were very based in other cultures. When I went to school, none of that was recognized. I was a Black girl, oftentimes assumed to be, a multi-generational African American student in school. And so that tended to, just kind of really kind of simplify who I was. So I think that tends to happen in US society broadly, but it's reflected in the schools as well, not really recognizing the backgrounds of students, particularly if they are, the children of immigrants. Um, a third thing that I would say, in addition to the flattening out, also goes to the hypervisibility part that Ada talked about, which is um, this kind of model minority expectation. So a lot of times we saw in schools and even in higher education, when someone would find out that someone had an immigrant background, it was like, oh, well, that's the reason you do so well. The stereotype about both Black Americans and Black immigrants that really serves no one well because sometimes people ask, well, why is the model minority stereotype bad? Why is it bad for someone to stereotype you in a positive way, quote unquote? But the fact is that a student is supposed to be in school to have support, right? They're supposed to be in school. They have to do their part, certainly, but the expectation is not that they're going to come in fully formed. We should be supporting them in their learning and all of these kinds of things. If we assume they need no help, that they need no supports, that they need no resources, that they're just going to do well on their own, then we're not serving and supporting those students. And likely they're not going to achieve their best and brightest potential. Or why does it have to be so hard for them to have to do so? Right. And so, that's the other aspect I think about how we tend to kind of flatten our understanding of both the Black diaspora, but also particularly Black immigrants who are navigating our school system in different kinds of ways, if that makes sense.
That's very true. I love that answer. And that's bring to the next part of this, which is related to that, and I wanted you to see. I got this from your book. It says Black immigrants K to 12 students' experiences within the school environment are shaped by the interplay of structural, cultural, financial, and logical factors that influence their families. And families, this engagements with the school's environment. These factors not only influence the extent to which families can participate in their children's education, but also affect how children navigate tension between their family and school environment. So I see that there's somebody that gave this is maybe a parent from Nigeria, and she says I had one of the asking me, that could be one of the teacher asking me, do you speak English at home? And I said, I speak English at home. I'm speaking English to you right now. You know what I mean. They are like, well, I guess with my accent, they are like, well, I just want to know if the child speak any other language at home. I try to correct people the most times tell them that Nigeria English is not a second language. My English might sound different and my accent, or it might sound differently, but spoken English is not a barrier. So what are some of the most common institutional barriers Black immigrant students face in K to 12th grade in higher education?
Yeah, as the part that you read demonstrates, one of the big ones is language. And even though a lot of Black immigrants come from countries that are largely English speaking, there are some that are Hispanophone, meaning that they speak Spanish or English or French speaking, or they might speak another language. But the matter is like over 78% of Black immigrants speak English as one of their languages. It's often a colonized version of English, and so it's an English that is not always understood in the United States. One of our other colleagues does some research around this in terms of multilingual Englishes, as she calls it, and whether we should talk about them as different dialects of English or different languages of English that immigrants tend to speak that is different from American English. And so what that represents or results in is somebody like myself similarly being situated and being placed in English language learner classes, even though they might speak English or predominantly English in their home. Another way that becomes a structural barrier is in terms of what types of courses a student is able to take. And if they're tracked to be only in English language learning classes or end up being misplaced instead into special education. Another structural barrier is, and a big one that often happens is especially as a lot of immigrant households are multi-generational households. So the whom is the primary parent in terms of who has time to go and offer their times to the school in terms of parent-teacher conferences that may or may not align with the work schedule that many individuals have. And often schools are set up to be very nuclear family focus, meaning that the parents, they may not always think about maybe aunts or uncles or grandparents or cousins, older cousins who may be in the household, who may also be able to offer their services. There's really another big one is thinking through what kinds of resources individuals are able to provide their children, but may not be seen as legible or legitimate to the school setting. So even though my parents were born and raised in Nigeria and had education, it doesn't mean that they are able to translate some of their educational knowledge into the US American system, right? And the same thing happens with those in higher ed as well, that those who might have done college in their home country, when they come to the US and they're trying to aid their student through the college going process, it's a completely different educational system. And so the kinds of structural barriers that occur with how folks are able to navigate the American educational system in terms of what kinds of content is being taught, how they're able to advocate for their kids, especially when we're coming from cultures in which you are often defaulting to the educators as being the more knowledgeable individuals. And so to be heavily involved in your child's education is typically not the norm. But here in the US, it is. So that's another barrier that sometimes can limit how parents are perceived as being active agents in their kids' education.
Yeah, that is very true. And I think that is one of the biggest reason why we started the mentorship program because we realize a lot of kids are struggling understanding the education system. And at the same time, the parents who could be helping at home, they are more than equally confused about the system. I was sharing that and somebody told me even the Americans themselves, they are equally confused when it comes to the education system. But you can imagine somebody who is from Africa. Um, the worst comes, and many of them are those who cannot speak English or don't
Mm-hmm.
understand at all about the education system. And the only way to know about it is when you go to those teachers' conference, because that's how you learn on what's happening and the sharing what's all going on in the school.
But
Uh,
only if the teachers conference happens at a time that you're able to attend to
the
actually meet with them. If your work schedule or other commitments don't limit your ability to attend.
Absolutely, the many people are not able to attend because of different work schedule. Another biggest challenge that I've seen also when we were growing up, a good example for me, my mom never came to school, never knew what high school I went to. The 4 years she never came to my high school. And I don't even she know where the high school where I went to, it was Syndicate. The college, she only came for my graduation when I was graduating from university. And many people come with the same mentality. You know, you're on your own, you go to college, wait, call me when the graduation is coming up. And that also now with that kind of a mentality of how we grew up, how we were able to be self-driven in school, we think the same way apply with the kids when they come here. Unfortunately, not many kids are self-driven. I just shared a text last week about the four types of students that we have in our community, and you have to know your children. There are those who are self-driven. They don't need too much push. They can do it. There are those who actually need push, and when you push, you get a better outcomes. And there are those who so they need constant reminder. They will push. You keep on pushing, but never give up. But the fourth category is that there are those people who, no matter how much you push, they are not gonna do much, gonna do any much. But the only thing I'll say, all the four categories you have to push because you don't know what the outcome will be if you push. If you don't, then you might be able to have a kid performing at level 2 when they could be performing at level 10, only they need your help as a parent to push. And I think that is what we as parents we need to know.
Yeah, there's ways in which, growing up as a child of Nigerian immigrants, now as somebody who's on the other side and as somebody who researches this, I understand that that's their version of support, and that we have to also problematize what that pushing can look like, especially for the high, quote unquote, high achieving kids. Because
Yeah.
often, as you had alluded to earlier, was that it ends up being perceived as this pressure to do really good in school. And so
Hmm.
with that, also that pressure has a negative consequence on these youth too, that they
Yeah.
can do really well academically, but their mental health is not as great.
Hmm.
And those things end up that like, oh, but someone will say they're still really successful. Oh, look, they're a doctor. Oh, look, they've made it through. Oh, look, they got into all 8 Ivy Leagues. That is not for naught, right? It's sometimes that some of these things come at a cost, and
Mm.
it's trying to weigh what those costs are and just make sense of what those different costs can be. And that often we know that our support might look different, and being able to articulate different types of support for our kids is also beneficial.
It does. It does. Um, that brings to the next part, which I feel like as parents, and I think this is the audience. I'm sure there are people who are educators, there are people who are parents. And I think in what ways do immigrant status and racial identity intersect to impact education access and outcomes?
Sure. So I can, share a little bit. And actually, I'll speak a little bit more broadly just to the previous points that you had made, Jeffrey, around advocacy. What we find as scholars is that educational advocacy, particularly by parents, but, even just a very close adult, an aunt, an uncle, a community partner, it makes almost all of the difference when things like college access are at play. So, in getting into college and navigating those systems, we know and we see that parental involvement is one of the highest, sometimes the highest factor in a student being able to move into the next level of their educational experience. And so, in our research, to the point with the quote that you mentioned by the Nigerian mother, in that quote, she said, I stopped going to the school after that experience with someone's, asking, questioning my English. I didn't want to be there anymore. I did the bare minimum to connect to the school. And, unfortunately, and I completely understand that. And unfortunately, it's a detriment to the child, and it shouldn't have to be the parent's responsibility. Really, the school should be, engaging with parents and be doing it in culturally supportive ways, right? They don't always meet those goals. And so, organizations like your own, like Vitendo for Africa, can be such an important bridge, those mentorship programs, providing that information. Because we know when it comes to the intersection of race and immigration status, but unfortunately, Black immigrants are very volatile. We are a group that is most likely to be deported. We are a group that does not make an income commensurate with our educational background. So, although we are some of the most educated immigrants in this country, our income levels don't match that.
True.
Right. And, all of these things are, what Ada and I talk about as a point of is part of, structural racism and all of these other kinds of things that exist, that kind of come as cost to our ability for mobility in this country. So, again, as an immigrant, it's like sometimes there's a feeling of just put your head down, just do what you need to do. You're gonna struggle, you have to struggle, right? But we as a Black immigrant community, we've never quite achieved what we should be achieving given all that we do.
Mm,
And education is such an important place to begin to kind of alter that work to be able to pour into. Again, for that those advocacy pieces. So if there are any parents on the call, I would say that asking questions of teachers again in ways that are about partnership, not being antagonistic, but just asking questions, posing questions, joining a PTO if you can, asking for notes from meetings if you can't go to a meeting, just showing even that you're just interested will ensure a lot of some in many times that a school is like, oh, they're paying attention, like I better do my job.
mhm,
Right? It's the same like in the healthcare system. When you go to the hospital and you start asking questions, what are you giving me? Like, what's this medication? They're like, oh, they're paying attention, right? Because we also experience disparities in the health system too in this country. So sometimes that advocacy is it's such a critical thing, and figuring out how to do that is important. And again, community partners can play such an important role in doing that so that all of the weight doesn't fall to the child to be the bridge between school and home.
that's true.
And it oftentimes is a big responsibility for them to be that bridge.
Yes, you've said a very good point because I think one of the when it comes to the advocacy for our children, they really need our support as parents, and especially in a classroom where they feel unheard. And if the teacher themselves they don't see the involvement of the parent, they are very likely to ignore your child, even helping them when they really need help. And I think because of people feeling that they don't want to be asked because of the accent, they feel like they're not confident talking to them to the teachers. Like you said, many of them will just back up and not go to participate or even involve in anything with the teachers, whether it's the email and the staff. And one thing that I know that I've adopted is teachers send emails a lot of times, or whatever it is. If I don't have anything to do, what I always do, I just reply, well received. Thank you for sharing things. Thank you for the care you do for my children and other kids. Every teacher who is, I remember when I went to the school, couple of teachers every time for my kids, they will tell him, I know you because you already spent my email. I know you because you say very nice thing about it. So for sure, if this teacher has anything, I know they will do the best for my kid because they know I care, they know I'm concerned. And I think that's why I always when I tell the parents, you don't have to do much. It's just a simple email. If you can talk to them, send a reply to that email. They keep on sending so many emails. And I can tell you many of them don't get reply, but if you respond, they will remember you and they know that you care. Um, and I think one of the things that I know that has helped when it comes to advocating for Africans, immigrants, is actually we've been big on doing multicultural night in schools. Multicultural night, if your kid is in school, and if you can, we have helped many parents start multicultural night in their own school. It not only help your kids to embrace their culture, but it also teaches other kids in the school to
Right.
see
Hmm.
the different culture that your kids go through and they have questions. Last week and things that I think last week and yesterday, between last week, we have done 6 different schools every night. Bring the drums, play the sound, do all the show, share the food, and when the kids come and eat their food, they see that when your kids prepare those chatbot about their country and their food and all the stuff. What you don't know you're helping them is to embrace who they are, be proud of their food, be proud of their clothing, be proud of their music. Last night we were doing at my son's school, and he was teaching them how to play drums. And he had all the kids around with like 20 different drums and the kids were playing and I let him teach them. He felt proud of himself and kids were just coming and hugging him and telling him, hey, you love your drum skills and all the stuff. So the kids themselves knows about himself and other kids in the school, they are learning something unique, positive about your kids. Um,
Yeah. One
Yeah.
other really quick thing I would also add, sometimes I know for parents that I've worked with, particularly parents who have just come to the United States, the parent teacher meetings that we have sometimes can be a little challenging, in terms of what am I expected to do or say. So, I know I've helped, parents like develop, here are three things to ask during these parent
Mm,
teacher meetings, ask about, what is one area you see my child struggling with a bit. Also ask them, what's a strength that you see in my child? What are they doing well? Because a lot of times the focus is the things they're doing wrong. But then you can go back to your child and say, I spoke to your teacher today and they say you're doing so well with this, so you're really strong at that. And you can also be someone that can help to encourage them, as well as tell them the things, they need to work on. So there's sometimes, just a few ways in which we can help prepare our communities for doing these things that they might not be used to doing, but
mhm.
that can also show that they are an advocate for their child. And again, let the teachers know who, again, as an educator myself, we hope that all of our teachers, all of our faculty care for our children, but we know in this country they're overstressed. They have a bajillion kids in the classroom. And
Mm,
so so it's not always that they don't care. Sometimes it's just that, again, if they're kind of in the middle, they're doing fairly well. It's like, oh, they're not causing any problems, so I don't have to, do that extra. So checking in will help with that. And sometimes having that little checklist or little list of things to ask can be helpful so you're prepared.
I agree. That's a very strong point. Um, and I think maybe we have, like I mentioned, we could be having some educators in the forums, which I would want them to maybe give some advice or some tips on how they can be very helpful in the classroom. And I'm looking at your chapter 4, or on page 57. It says, I face many challenges in my school here in the United States because of the challenges in my cultural and education background. It was hard for my peers and teachers alike to understand me, what I bring to the learning environment. I feel like I am being ignored in the class because of my past cultural and education differences. There are instances where some of my peers ignore me or give me excuse for not working with me in a group work or being in the same discussion. Um, and you that was some Kenyan ski sendu from a first generation. I think is a student who has first generation Kenyan. What you say here, in addition to that, you say Black immigrant K to 12 students, cognitive and socio-economic socio-emotional development, self-esteem, and education outcomes, and life path are significantly shaped by relationship with their family, peers, and school personnel. So the question that I wanted to hear, to maybe you can share a little bit, is what are some practical steps that educators and school leaders can take to support Black immigrant students more effectively? And second part of that is how can teacher training and curricular development better reflect lived experience of Black immigrants? And Ida or Chrystal, Ida, you want to go first?
Yeah, I think when thinking in the K-12 space, especially our teacher education programs, how they can think more broadly, more diasporically about the Black experience. So they're educating and training our teachers to understand the diversity of the Black youth that they're encountering. That means that their lived experiences are going to be varied, but also in some respects, some are living similar experiences to their Black American youth, especially the second generation. There's ways in which there's some aspects of their experiences that are similar to their Black American youth. Whereas for first generation, there may be some differences that do arise. And so some of the things that teachers can do is one simple activity that I have that is really easy to do at the lower grades is like an about me activity, right? So this opportunity for teachers to fill out a sheet that says about me, and they send it to all of their students. And in return, all the students do one as well about themselves. And that's an opportunity for teachers to learn about who is actually in their classroom space with them, right? And so that way they're able to make examples or things that connect to something that a student actually said. Um, Another big thing is doing more culturally responsive pedagogical styles. So choosing literature, right, for an English class that might be that might include literature that is from authors from the different countries that your students are from. This is something actually my high school teacher did. She actually made sure that our reading list, my senior year of high school, was featuring an author from every country of a student that was represented in the classroom. And that to me was so wild at that time. But looking back at it now, there's ways in which that was so forward thinking about the ways in which we got to be and feel seen in the classroom space, and that we got to learn about our own lived experiences and culture along with other people, in addition to learning the like actual things that we were supposed to learn for senior year of an English course, right? And so there's ways in which how we teach, what we teach, can make subtle changes that make the students feel more seen and valued in the classroom space. Being able to be an advocate for your students as well, especially if you see that a student ends up being mistracked, meaning that they might be placed in a track that may not be the best for them. And so being able to advocate for them to be put in the right level of schooling, right? So if they're placed in the English language learner class, but they actually speak English, then making sure that you can advocate for them to be placed in a regular classroom, right? Or if they are coming with a level of knowledge base in a math level, and that we make sure that they get placed in the correct math level, right? Those kinds of advocacies, especially from the teacher, can be so beneficial for the youth.
That is very true. I agree. When you mentioned that, I just remembered that when you mentioned about the literature in the classroom. I remember when my daughter, she's a freshman right now in high school, but when she was in second grade, the teacher, when I just understanding that she has a foreign-born students in her class, she went out of her way to bring books about Kenya authors, African authors, and she created a section in her classroom. And then she reached out to me and asked me if I would want to come and talk to her classroom about, at that time, it was around Christmas time, it's holidays in Kenya, how kids celebrate holiday in Kenya. And I remember us having that conversation with her, and we connected with her and my family. She will come to our house and sit down with my daughter's second grade kid, sitting down and cooking together, eating together. And since that time, my daughter still remembers her teacher right now. She's a freshman, and she still remembers her. If you ask her who has been the most impactful teacher in your life, and she'll tell you that was her teacher, second grade creature. And it's because of she went out of her way to make her feel accepted in the classroom, even if she was the only immigrant in the class. But at the same time, she wanted her students to be able to learn about her and herself. She went out of her, she would come to her house. She would come to when they were performing because they were doing African dance. She would go to events where my kids are performing so that she can be more equipped about this different culture and be effective to connect with the kids. And I think if you ask me, that is something that is every teacher will be able to, if every teacher will be able to learn and be able to expose themselves to learning about different culture, I think they become more effective and they're more likely to connect better with their students than when you just walk in a classroom and putting everybody in one cluster that this is the same thing. I mean, going out of their way, it's very important.
And it can seem like it's going out of their way, but really for some it's the essence of how they are as an educator. So I was doing a training earlier this year, and this one teacher is a middle school PE and health teacher, and he does a segment on healthy eating, and he's reframed the whole notion around healthy eating around rice. And what he does is have all the kids bring in a family dish that is around rice, because so many kids from so many different countries eat rice. and
Mm,
what are the different healthy ways that we engage with rice across the globe. And so he said he had to like make an adaptation because like white people from America don't really eat rice like that, except for people from the South. But he said that that change in his assignment made it so his students could feel seen, but that he could also learn so much more about each of his different students as well.
that is true. I like that. That's very
Mm-hmm.
powerful. Um, I think let me just go to this part and about personal and community reflections from your research. Uh, were there any personal stories or interviews from your research that deeply moved you or changed your perspective? Dr. Chrystal.
Sure, I can share a little bit. Um, I think the stories that moved me the most in when we would, in interviews and things like that, um, were actually similar to some of the stories that I'm seeing in the chat, um, which, where students were having experiences with racism, with xenophobia, in their educational experiences, and oftentimes not really knowing how to navigate it and feeling like they had to prove themselves, prove their worth. These brilliant students, in the K through 12 system, in college, in graduate school, time and time again, being made to feel as if they were not as smart or not as worthy as other students, and that they would have to work twice as hard to get kind of half as far, which we say in the Black American community as well, which I think did not change my perspective about this, but I think continued to round out my perspective of what I'm going to say, which is that, when we think in the US, there's so many different communities of Black people, right? We have Africans and we have folks from the Caribbean. We have, again, folks from Latin America. We have folks that have been in the US for generations and generations. And we can oftentimes experience tensions with one another. But I think that there, ultimately is so much more that's shared that brings us together than divides us. And as we were engaging in work with Black immigrants, many of it, although there's lots of nuance and distinctions and uniqueness, there's also a lot of overlap of experiences with Black American youth as well. And so I just, kind of continue to hope for engagement and mobilization within and amongst our diverse Black communities, that we can learn to kind of talk to each other and to kind of work through some of the tensions that sometimes and stereotypes that exist within across our own communities, so that we can be stronger in this country that is a lot of times working to kind of bring us down in different kinds of ways. And I'll share even for myself as an example, growing up in a very West Indian home, there were stereotypes about Black Americans, even though I was born in America. So I was like, well, aren't I a Black American? No, you're our child. So that's the difference. There was a stereotype. When I was getting ready to marry my husband in Kenya, my mother asked, are you sure he doesn't have other wives over back in Africa? And she loves him now. But, these like little, but they're important things, right? These stereotypes that we sometimes have about one another. And, we don't always kind of get past. We're not always even engaging with one another. A lot of times I think the majority, white communities see us as all the same, but don't even recognize that sometimes there's oftentimes tensions with amongst us as well. So, I think the research really helps me further see that there's so many ways in which we can be connecting and supporting one another. If we can kind of learn how to get this elephant in the room out, and work past some of the stereotypes we sometimes have of one another as Black people in the US. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that's something that kind of came about in the work for me.
Yeah.
Uh, Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, in addition to that, I think the stories of the youth who feel that they're not up to snuff, even though they're like really, really successful. I think really thinking about what the kind of perfectionism that comes about for some of our youth and how that gets expressed. Either it looks like they are lazy, but really they're just so overwhelmed and overstimulated that they are unable to like do the work, or that they just are so deep in the work and are overextending themselves, and often are trying to make sure that they are doing their worth to make up for their parents' decision to come to a new place and start anew. And that there's a pressure that whether or not that's being placed on them, that they feel, and that they're trying to make sense of that by doing these different actions in these different ways, and to create more space and grace for our kids to be that kids. And it's a thing that is very, I know in talking to my mom, what do you do for fun? What do you mean, what do I do for fun? It's the like, actually, how do we create space that allows our kids to discover these new things of like fun and free time in a way that we weren't necessarily afforded in the same way, and giving the space for them to say no to opportunities that they might have liked doing before, that they may no longer be as invested in the same way.
Absolutely, absolutely. Wow, thank you so much. I see that there's Peggy Sayo to share something on the chat there. It says it's so funny that African immigrants will be criticized for speaking English with an accent. Yet, when European and English speaking folks' accents are adored by the same people criticizing our accent English. The bottom line, in my opinion, is that dark-skinned people, people of color, are considered not as smart as white people. With that concept at the back of their minds, our accent immediately invokes the damp stereotype that already exists. It is tough world to navigate. That's why we need to be there for our children and remind them that they are smart and need to believe in themselves. I agree. I think one of the biggest part that we do have a program called Building Speaker Momentum Speaker Series, and also that we use as a supply. And there's another one that's Bridging the Gap. We do some speaker series between the African Americans and African immigrants, trying to address misconception that exists between the two community. And I see both of you, Ada and Dr. Chrystal, you've really highlighted some of those concepts in your research, why we need to address some of those stereotypes that we carry along between different community, leave alone what the America itself, the system itself, would really try to stereotypes our community. And many people, when you don't speak English, if you have an accent, the things that come into their mind, they think you're not educated. It's exposure. If you're not exposed, you just think if somebody cannot speak English, is not educated. We have doctors who can do very good surgery and engineers who can do great work, but they cannot speak English. I think they can't speak English. I think the language is not, I don't know why the language becomes the measure of your ability to do things, or whether you're smart or not, is because you can speak a very good English, and if you have an accent, it's a problem. Yeah, that's something that I know. We have to educate everybody, and everybody needs to be intentional to have a very open mind to learn and address some of those misconceptions. Dr.
And I
Masi,
would just, oh, I
go
was
ahead.
just gonna say in response to that, and that's a big problem in the US and in our schools. We don't value language
Mm,
learning, really. It's like you must learn English, but some people come to this country knowing three, four other languages and
yes,
dialects, right? And that's not valued. That's not seen as an asset. Whereas most people, again, who have been here for multiple generations, speak one language, right? Speak English only. And we don't, and in schools, we don't value language learning as much, learning multiple languages. Children don't tend to really pick up learning a language oftentimes until later in their schooling. And so, it's a really major issue in the education system. And we talk about something in education scholarship called linguistic capital, which
mm,
is, again, just in knowing multiple languages, really what that does to the brain and allowing you to be able to think in different ways and be innovative and, being able to kind of cross bridges and in terms of your understanding of things. It's not even just the knowing more than one language. It is there's something that does in terms of how you're able to think and process. And we just don't value that enough in the US. Um, and I won't even get into the accent thing, but yes, 100% I agree with Dr. Mercy. And actually, no, I'm sorry, with Peggy Seo about what she said there.
Yeah, great. That's a good point. Dr. Massey says, thank you for sharing your experiences. I experienced so many discriminatory situations. My English one, a professor informed me over and over on the first class that her class was not an ESL class. She judged me because of my last name and my blackness. I informed her that I took an English placement test and was placed in English 1A and not an ESL class. She was surprised when I told her that I scored 98% on the placement test. I felt insulted and embarrassed. I had to prove myself in her class. My experience in college provided me the skills I needed to advocate and protect my kids in school from prejudiced teachers. That's very, thank you for sharing, Dr. Massey, for sharing that experience. And I think that resonates with many people. When they go to classroom, the teachers, they say that especially the class, especially an English class, and I've had many share in those who are in community college, just because you have an accent, the teachers sees you, perceives you in a different way. So thank you for sharing that. Shinazom Oleru says, is there any advice you have for parents wanting to build a multi-generational relationship between the school and the family? And how can a parent open that door or open the mind? You want to respond to that? Ada?
Yeah, I think it's very possible to build multi-generational relationships with the school by making the family present in different ways. My brother actually does this now with his kids in ways in which, it's not like on the first day he gets to know the teacher, lets them know, hey, here are grandma, grandpa, auntie, uncle, they're going to be involved in some way, some capacity, right? Um, and so that means that provides a space for my mom to go in as grandma, to go in and do reading days at school or volunteer, right? And so there's ways in which bringing that to the forefront with the teacher early on can be really helpful with how to build a multi-generational kind of relationship with them. That isn't just the parent themselves, but the household as being a kind of conduit or the safe haven for this child. And that, of course, we're all in a team together to ensure the success of this particular student. That's definitely one way to get involved. It's also seeing the culture of the school. So not just getting to know the teacher, but also getting to know the principals of your school, the associate principals for however long your children might be at that school, can help also build a relationship of kind of like another layer of support for your student as well,
Mm-hmm.
and for the family.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think I can emphasize more on that, but I would say one of the biggest way that I know has been very effective is those passport night, diversity nights. It's your greater opportunity to educate those teachers, to educate those people in the school what it is and what it about your different culture. Um, I find it more effective when I do that. Even last night when we were there, I spent most of the time talking to teachers than to the students because I know they have an effect in the students' life. They have an effect in my child life, and I want them to have. I want a teacher to approach my child in a from a very informed perspective, because what the teacher say will have a lasting impact on my child. And that brings to the next part that I see the comments here. Bullying is an obvious thing for immigrant kids. My son was told that he was the ugliest boy in the class. He looked like a monkey. And a short skirt asked him why he was looking at her. He almost became suicidal. That is really hard. I mean, that is heartbroken. It's very very, very painful when you hear parents sharing that. And this is a lot of them go through it. Many of the young people, especially boys. And that's why I was even interested with this topic tonight. Our young boys have very, very at risk when they leave our homes. We've had, especially like now when you mentioned about young girl, we've had some boys being accused. If a girl is bullying a boy and he just goes there and tell he sexually assaulted me, just to punish the boy, the teachers will not even, they don't have time even to verify whether it's true or not. Many young people get into those difficult situations and put in different, punished for things they didn't do just because they're black. And it's very like one of the parents shared there. Some of them they may end up their life. Some of them may end up dropping school. Some of them their life may change just because of something somebody said or something that can be prevented. But I'm happy that we are having this conversation.
I want to,
Go ahead.
it's really important for us to acknowledge. So a lot of my work is within the realm of education. I'm an educational psychologist. One of the things that we have to pay attention to is the fact that mental health is an issue that our community faces. And in the United States, Black youth are the highest rate for suicide right now and have been a growing number over the last 5 years. Every other racial group is decreasing in suicide rates, and yet we're seeing an increase in Black youth increasing in suicide. So ways in which we need to, our cultures and our religions and also so many things engage with the conversation around mental health in a very in ways that may not necessarily afford the space for our youth to bring forth what they're going through. And therefore, we may not always know how best to support them, but how do we at least provide the space for them just to speak their minds and speak their truth and speak what they're going through and support them, even if we don't understand, even if we don't know. That can make a world of a difference for a youth that might be experiencing or thinking of suicidal ideation. At our conference that we just went to this past weekend in Denver, the statistic is 1 in 4 Black youth are identifying with suicidal ideation. So the thought of suicide, they might not necessarily commit it, but 1 in 4 youth. So this is really, really important for us to think about aspects of mental health and how that also plays a role in the education system too.
Ida, you have really raised a very good and very valid point. Mental health is a big issue uh, in society. I think I'm wearing these shirts because I'm really a big advocate for mental health first aid. And we've been doing that for teen mental health first aid, adult mental health first aid, and youth mental health first aid. If you're a parent, let me just put it this way, I'm gonna do a small promo commercial here. If you're a parent and you have children, and you have not taken a class of youth mental health first aid and adult mental health first aid, you're doing a big disservice to yourself and you're being disservice to your kid. They need you. You need to be equipped to know because they have a lot of things they're going on outside when they leave the house. And if you're not very equipped, you could be a common stressor to them just because you're not very well equipped. And many people get complained because I really push for people to take those classes. Please, please, please sacrifice your time. You could save your son or your daughter's life because they came to you and you knew what to do when they came and they showed you, or you saw some signs of depressions and you know what to do. The problem is when they show those signs of depressions, you don't know, you don't see them, and then all of a sudden you will be say, it's too late. I saw it, but I didn't do it. I didn't know what to do. Now you're realizing it's too late. The reason why we take those classes, and I encourage you to do that, please, it's one of the best investments you can do for your child and for yourself. Teen mental health first aid, please, anybody 14 years and 18, encourage them to do it. We offer those classes for free, but I know it's life-changing programs that I would recommend people to take. I was looking at the time here, and I'm sorry, I see somebody says, I never knew that there was the sort of prejudice and discrimination against immigrants until now. I'm going through it one-on-one. I hate the discrimination. It has hit me hard. That's somebody sharing that. I really appreciate you sharing that. And then somebody was saying for parents who have college students what can they do to help them with their education when they are in college? Any 2, 3 points you want to share before? Because I know we're running against time and we have.
Sure. I'll just share briefly that, a lot of times colleges and universities kind of have this expectation that when a student goes to college, it's time to kind of cut ties a little bit with the family. And in many of our communities, that is not the norm. We stay connected, and, we're more collective in our values. And so, please, when your child are in college, don't feel that need to relinquish the close ties and communication. They may be wanting to have some more independence in certain kinds of ways, and it's okay to give space, but also recognize that sometimes the university environment, the college environment isn't supporting you getting connected in. So I do tend to tell parents, to try to be aware of different kinds of resources that are at your child's college. So there's education that's happening in the classroom, but there are also so many other kinds of resources that are on a college campus that they may or may not be aware of. So, if they're saying they're struggling in any ways, around particularly like mental health might be an issue in some ways. You could be the person to tell them, hey, there's actually a counseling center on your campus. It's free. You can make an appointment. Because even though we tell the students all of this information, they sometimes it doesn't always sink in, right? So you can actually still be a resource to them. And certainly there's what they're learning in the classroom, but just sometimes being aware of what are the other resources on a campus that might be useful to them. Being that little extra reminder of those things to them, it can be important. And then, just all of the typical things, oftentimes in college, parents will say, oh, I want to see my child's grades or things like that. And we can't show them unless the child is still dependent under them, or the child gives permission. And so, really setting expectations with your child before they start their college classes around, having conversations with them about grades, saying that that's still something you want to know about. Because I will say, particularly amongst Black immigrants and African immigrants, I've seen so many children hiding their grades from their parents, switching their major. The parent wanted them to be pre-med, and then they, decide to switch to anthropology, and don't tell their parents until the parent comes for graduation, they find out. And you want to be able to be in communication with your child about all of the things they're doing and not put so much pressure on them that they feel they have to keep things from you. So there is that balance that I would just share as well.
That's very nice. I agree. The last question is for kids who are elementary school, what can parents do to prevent them from taking English as a second language learner? They miss so much while they are taking the class. What can the parents do to make sure kids are not placed in the classes and the test they are given is the same every year? And I think that is, for me, I can speak from my experience. All my kids were born here in the US, but they were placed in those ESL classes just because of our last name. So we went to school and we say, hey, you can't put them in the ESL class. They don't need it. They speak English. They don't have problem with any language. So you have to speak up and advocate for them. Otherwise, they just put them straight because they just of your last name. You want to say something?
Same word framework that you speak another language other than English at home.
Yeah. You want to add something on that?
Yeah, if you mark that you speak another language other than English at home, they will also sometimes use that as a marker to put them in EL, English language learner classes. And I don't say don't mark that, but do, as Jeffrey had noted as well, to advocate. I also would recommend talking with the ELL teachers And they can also advocate for a student who they know shouldn't be in ELL. In one of my studies, that happened to a student that she was placed in ELL because of her accent. And the ELL teacher advocated for her, and she ended up not just being put into regular courses, but she ended up getting tested and was put into the IB program at their school. So definitely, if you're unable to or don't feel comfortable advocating on behalf of your student, then at least the teacher can definitely do that as well.
Great. Ida, you wanna?
I think that was a perfect answer.
Okay, great, great. Thank you so much. I will give anybody who have some comments before we wrap it up. In the audience, you can unmute yourself. I know we went over, but this is one of the most effective and impactful sessions that we've ever had. I really appreciate your questions for being with us for that long. But anybody out there want to add something or say?
Is it
Elena?
Elena has her.
Yeah, unmute yourself. Elena? It's just Jolly?
Yes.
Yeah, your name is saying Elena, but I know it's I see Jolly.
Yeah. I'm really glad that I was able to attend this meeting tonight. Thank you so much. I really appreciate for all the information you guys have given us, and I hope that we can do something like this again next time. This is very helpful, and it's very important information that we need to know, and we need to have all of it at all the time, because our kids are having a lot of trouble and problem in school, and when we don't know how we can help them and what we can do for them to be in a safe place and for their education to continue without any problem, especially with the mental problem and mental health, and with the college students too, to know who they are, what they can do, for us parents to know how we can approach the teachers, the school, where there's a problem and where the kids are going through something. Thank you so much. I really get a lot of information tonight, and I will work on it. I really appreciate. May God bless you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Jolly, and I appreciate you for the great work you're doing in the community, helping the community, especially the children. But on our last part, anybody else before I call upon back to the speaker to do the closing remark?
Yes, I do have a question, Jeffrey. Thank you very much to our amazing speakers. I join in appreciating you for giving us this very valuable information. I like especially that you mentioned the fact that, you know, uh, having some of our kids do so well and achieving so much, sometimes many of them are pushed because of the expectations that we have. Your mom and dad are this, we're Africans, we work hard, we do well. And there is a consequence sometimes for some of them. Some of them experience burnout. There's that mental health, um, you know, attack as well that comes with that. And I know that personally, I know at least two kids who have done really well. They went through high school, they scaled through it and got all the straight A's and, got accepted into all the colleges. But then at the end, they just broke down. It's like they burnt out. They just couldn't take it anymore. So I'm liking what I'm hearing, how us as parents, I know you used the word hyper, is it hyper promotion or something? There's something, yeah, there was a way you distinguish that. Right, that we put so much expectation. And Jeffrey gave a good example when he said his son was playing the drums and all the kids gathered and they were celebrating him. I know for me personally, when my son was that age and I saw him playing drums at school, I came home and I said, we are Nigerians, you don't ever, you know. So I'm guilty of that as well. But let's continue to learn from some of your data and some of the research you've conducted. And I hope, like my sister said, you will come back and let's have this conversation again, because there's so much that we can learn from all the knowledge you've gained and all the experiences you've had. So thank you.
And I would just say
And
also for parents on the call to also give yourself some grace too. Now, as a parent myself of young children, we are so hard on ourselves. And we sometimes also have to model rest and well-being, which is hard. I remember growing up, I can't remember times when I saw my mother or my grandmother just sit down, a moment when they weren't taking care of someone or
Mm-mm,
something. So it wasn't modeled to me how to
mm,
rest,
mm.
how to take to do that. I
So,
still don't know. My husband's always like, "You're always telling me to do something." I was like, "There's always something to do," you know. And so, but I have to think I need to show my children how to also rest sometimes, right? And so that they don't burn out so quickly and in life, because we do have so many pressures. So I just wanted to say that as well. It's hard when again you're striving. We have bills to pay. We have
mm,
so many things
mm,
to do,
mm,
but we have
mm.
to also somehow give ourselves some grace and a little bit of rest where you can have it, and let our children see that in us too.
It's
And I know
awesome.
Dr. Mercy, you were trying to speak, so am I.
y- yeah, there are certain things in life that you experience. This is one of them for me today to watch the two of you do this presentation. I get so much joy watching you, the two of you. I having moved from Nigeria to here at a younger age, and then grew up here and having to go through some of things that you didn't understand because you didn't know that you were being discriminated against or that you were being put down and stuff like that. And then you learn that as you live here longer, and then that shapes your worldview of how to
Mm.
uh, help your family and help your children to survive in this place. And then watching you and the book and everything is just, I wish that some of us had this experience before we started raising our children, right? But we can't go backwards. And the next thing that when I look at the Nigerian younger generation now, is that the boys are falling a little behind sometimes because we have this expectation. The girls here, they are doing so. The boys are doing well, but the girls are just top of it, right? So we just have to be careful because the boys are, every time you talk to them, you don't compare them with the girls all the time, right? At least that's what I try not to do for my own children because I only have boys and they've done well. So we also have to give them kudos because African, and I will use African American girls are doing exceptional stuff here. And the boys, when they're in school, they want to be football players and they want to be basketball players. So they concentrate a lot on that. And then at the end, not a lot of them, only probably a tiny little, maybe a few of them will go. But they have wasted a lot of time in that, which I wouldn't really call it a waste of time, but it draws a lot of them back. But watching the two of you today, it just warms my heart. And I'm so glad that I called in. And you guys are amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That is so powerful, Dr. Marcy. I really appreciate your words.
Yes.
That's true. I think you mentioned about the boy child. It's a big burden on my heart right now, reaching out the boy child. And when you mentioned that, it's good so that we all can take as a challenge. Parents, for when we talk about raising strong, resilient boys, it calls for fathers to take up responsibility and the mothers to also speak life in the life of those young men. So thank you so much for sharing that. And this the last part I want to share because we want to do this is let's just go ahead and get back Dr. Chrystal and Ada. Please share a little bit about the book and how we can get them, how we can get those discounts, and maybe what we expect from the book.
Yeah, so we shared the link
And I'll stick it in the
here.
chat.
Yeah, so it's in the chat. So you can get it from Teachers College Press. And if you use the promo code HIB25, you get 20% off. So the link and the code are here, and we'll also share the flyer, which Dr. Chrystal just shared with you all. So that's definitely one way. You could also get it on Amazon and other places that books are sold as well.
Great. Dr. Chrystal, what do we expect from the book?
You can expect lots of different things. You can expect to learn more about Black immigrants in the US. You can learn about how they are navigating, really how we are, because I'm speaking to us. So how we are navigating K through 12 schools as well as higher education, how we gain access to higher education, some of the challenges there. We talk about workforce development, the outcomes of education and what that looks like. So it really just, I think, helps to get a bigger picture. Oftentimes, I hear from people who have read it that they have felt seen in the book, and that they have recognized that their experiences are not just their experiences, but it's helpful to see that this is really what we are experiencing as a community. There'll also be different recommendations and frameworks that you can draw from. So, we really hope that the book is useful to people. There's lots of stories and quotes from students throughout the book as well. So it's not just academic, kind of intellectual. It, I think, really can touch a lot of folks in different ways.
Perfect, perfect. And that's the book. I have the book here with me. So it's a great resource. Okay, I see that. Okay, all right, there you go. So I got that. It was easy. I went online. The link that we just shared there, we were able to get the book. They'll ship to your home address, and you can stick this time. My last part is to say that get your book. Let's have part 2 of this. And then the part 2 now, we will be speaking for people who have read the book, and we can have kind of a review, what I call the book club, book review from each other. I believe, based on what I've seen, the comments and what I see, the people who've been in the audience sticking with us around, it tells me that they are very much interested with this particular topic. And if it's okay, should we have part 2 of this, Dr. Chrystal? I mean, and Ada?
Sure. We would love to return. We'd love to hear your thoughts about the book. So we are more than willing to do so. And also, if you want to stay in touch with us individually, we're on different social media as well. We're on LinkedIn. If you just type in our names on Instagram, Facebook, but mostly it's just my family on Facebook if you'd like to see see that, things like that too. But we would love to come back, Jeff, and talk about the book. We really wrote it for our communities. And so you all inspire us, and so we would love to be in community with you as you engage the book.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And is there any upcoming events that maybe you're having coming up that we can engage our audience?
Not right at the moment. We're taking kind of a summer break, and then we're gonna, as faculty, and then we're coming back in the fall. So, but we can keep you, I guess, Jeff, maybe keep you in the loop with things. And again, if you follow us on social media, you'll see as different kinds of things come up. We usually post them there too.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for our panel tonight. Thank you for those great questions and your engagements. We love you all, and we hope to engage with everyone else. I'm going to be in Philadelphia this weekend, so if I get a chance, I can swing by.